Hello and welcome back to Basement Philosophy, or Philosophy from the Depths. And this week we're looking at the readings relating to our topic in week 5, which was resurrection and rebirth. And I'm going to go through 10 different items this week. Now, first of all is the Maimonides text that we looked at in the first segment, the Treatise on Resurrection. The text itself is just 30 pages long. It spans pages 21 to 51 in the book. And I'd recommend a quick read of all 30 pages just to get a feel for it. Of course, if you've got the time, then a more in-depth reading would be great. In addition to Maimonides' text, this book also contains an introduction, which is very good, along with an essay on the resurrection debate occurring in Maimonides' time. And these are worth reading as well if you want to go further into the topic. Now, this is a book called Resurrection, the Power of God for Christians and Jews. And this book is very good if you want to understand how Judaism moved from the widespread belief that death is the end of us to the belief that we will all one day be resurrected. If you don't have the time to read the whole thing, then perhaps just start with chapter 6 and go from there and just dip in and out. And here we have another edited book, Roads to Paradise. We'll come back to this again next week, but for this week I'd recommend reading chapter 33, which looks at some of the ways that reincarnation has been understood and defended by Islamic thinkers. And also how these believers in reincarnation have attempted to square their view and even draw their view from the Quran. And there's also this short journal article which looks at the belief in reincarnation that's held by a heretical Muslim sect, the Ali Haq. And it still exists in Iran and Azerbaijan, amongst other places. Now this is Mikhail Burley's book, Rebirth and the Stream of Life. I mentioned this book in the third segment this week, and I'd strongly recommend reading the first chapter, where he looks at the various different kinds of belief in reincarnation around the world. They really are quite different. And he does discuss various African views in this chapter as well, but not in any great detail. Elsewhere in the book, you'll find other discussions of African beliefs in reincarnation. And it's worth tracking these down just to see what he's got to say. Just look up Africa in the book's index to find out where he discusses this. Next is African Traditional Religion Encounters Christianity, a book by John Chitakure. With this one, look at chapter 4. Which is entitled The Centrality of the Ancestors. So this chapter works through Shona beliefs about ancestral spirits and the other kinds of spirits like the Mashavi and the Ngozi. And the same chapter is also on the reading list for next week, so reading it now will get you prepared for next week's topic. And here we have a journal article which covers the same two forms of reincarnation in Akan thought that we looked at in the final segment of this week. And it also contains a useful comparison between the Eastern understanding of reincarnation and the Akan view. And the two really are quite different. So if you want to understand how the two are different, this article is well worth 20 minutes of your time. And also there's this book. It's called Reincarnation by a philosopher called Majid. With this book, I'd recommend reading chapter 7, which is called The Doctrine of Reincarnation in African Philosophy. In that, Majid looks at different conceptions of reincarnation in Akan thinking. Now, with regard to the doctrine of simultaneous reincarnation that we looked at, Majid comes down very firmly on the side of those who don't see it as genuine reincarnation. He construes it as involving nothing more than an influence between a deceased ancestor in the spiritual world and a developing embryo in the physical world. There's also this article on Akan Philosophy of the Person, which can be found in the online Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. With this, I'd recommend reading section 1, which is about degrees of personhood. And this will help get some background and details on the Akan idea of resurrection. Need to be a little bit wary here because the author does use the term reincarnation to describe what happens when someone makes the transition from normal human being to ancestor. Now that's a bit unfortunate because it makes it sound as though ancestors have got physical bodies. You know, after all, reincarnation just means living again in a new body. So if the ancestors are physical and they've got bodies, then perhaps it makes sense to talk of people being reincarnated as ancestors. But if they're not, well, then it doesn't make sense to talk like that. And lastly, we have another journal article on African belief in reincarnation. And this article argues that there's no true belief in reincarnation in African religions, and that what has been described as reincarnation is in fact a different phenomenon, in which the spirit of a deceased person influences the development of a baby growing in the womb without actually transferring to the body of that baby. So that's all the items for this week. We'll see you again next week for the final instalment of Basement Philosophy.